I can't possibly be sure if we are live, but it feels like it.
Do we feel live?
I feel alive. So
I got a notification that says we're live.
Well, that's, notifications. They lie. No, I don't know if they lie or not, but I will say I'm seeing a thumbs up. I'm not seeing the chat quite yet, but...
Well, as long as we're entertaining as we founder around and try and figure out whether we're actually broadcasting or not.
That's what it's all about, honestly, is just being entertaining while being, kind of a dummy. That's how I live my life.
We'll repurpose some content from before we started streaming. Ask me what I'm drinking.
Oh, yes. What are you drinking?
Well, I'm drinking a Santa's Workshop Special.
What is a Santa's Workshop Special?
That is the strong black coffee of capitalism with just enough eggnog to take out the bitterness.
I love it. Now, are you a drinker? Do you drink?
So I was not a drinker until I became a game designer.
Yes, I know that feel.
And then, yes, over the past few years, I became a drinker.
I gotcha. Yeah. I remember when I first was looking forward to getting into video games. I was so excited about it. And that's right about the time I stopped playing video games. It was all kinds of work. Okay. It's ThursdAGE, my friend. I can't possibly be sure. Right. There I am. I hear me. Is that you?
That was a pop-up on my screen that started playing the stream from a few seconds ago.
That's nice. See, you don't know what kind of surprises you're going to get here. Us from the past right now. It looks like we've got 13. We've got lots of people watching. We got people hanging out. I want to welcome you all to ThursdAGE with Owen KC Stephens. And the KC, you know what that stands for? And people didn't know this, but I did, and I was trying to keep it under wraps. Killer Clogger.
Killer Clogger?
Yes, yeah.
I thought maybe since we're claiming I'm the nicest guy in gaming that it was Kind Citizen.
Oh, that's good too. Yeah, I guess we'll go with that. Kind Citizen works. So today we're trying out StreamYard. We want to streamline our whole video process. I see George says hello. Hello, George. Welcome to ThursdAGE. Welcome to Owen. Hello, Owen. How are you doing? Owen?
Probably not. Oh, how am I doing? I thought you were asking how George was doing, so you were just talking to him.
I'm curious, George, how you're doing as well, but
we care. We really care.
We do.
No, I'm pretty good. As I was just pointing out again before we started, we should stop talking before we stop streaming because we keep doing content and no one gets to see it. Next Thursday is Christmas Eve, and the Thursday after that is New Year's Eve. So I have this list of things that I'm supposed to have done before the end of the year, and suddenly that's things I'm supposed to have done in the next 2 weeks.
So, wow.
Modestly terrifying.
Does any of that include a stocking for your disembodied pal, Troy?
I presume you'll get a cheese ration, so I figure you're good.
Yeah, but that'll tide me through. Actually, that'll work.
If you want, I can send you a disembodied stocking.
I like that. I'm thinking I get what you're saying and that it is invisible. You can't
see it or touch it, but it's there.
Nice. Well, it's in my heart. That's nice.
Well, if you've got a stocking in your heart, I suspect you need to see a doctor.
That is very true. Yeah. I'm not a well man. I eat horribly. So we have a lot going on. We've got over the next couple ThursdAGE windows, we'll be on vacation. We'll be spending time, perhaps virtually distant unwrapping of presents. That's a little weird this year, a little odd. And then New Year's, which, of course, that I'm going to lock all the doors. I'm expecting the purge. But when thinking about kind of all the holiday stuff, what have you got cooking? I'm curious about what's going on in your world.
So I've got a housemate and a tiny little social bubble with just a couple of people from 2 different households, and they don't see anyone else, and neither do we. So there's this really tight, compact social bubble we see people in, which are friends of mine from 30 years ago in some cases, in most cases, actually. So this Friday, we are getting together to watch Greenland, the new Gerard Butler movie, which I was going to watch on my birthday because I have a tradition of watching a Gerard Butler movie every year on my birthday, but they pushed it back because of COVID, so I couldn't watch it until this weekend. And then we are going to have Craftmas on Christmas Eve, where that small group of people will come together and take the time to do all those crafts that we keep saying we're going to get to, like painting miniatures and assembling wooden train sets and building terrain. And we never actually get around to that. And we sometimes have what we call a gab and dab, which is a painting and talking party. It's like a Stitch and Bitch for the people who are familiar with it. But there are people who aren't really into the miniatures end of the gaming projects, but have other things they want to do. So we've got, the game room here at this house it's a 20 by 20 room, 21 by 22, I think. And there's a big table in the center of it. And we've got lights and pliers and all sorts of hacksaws.
Lights and pliers.
And hacksaws, yeah. We can either make crafts or we can torture people to try and find out where the lacquer box is. Those are both options.
Yeah. Or assemble like some kind of a Christmas golem.
Yeah, well, we sort of have a Christmas golem down there right now. We've got a giant 3-foot tall plastic jack-o'-lantern with a Santa hat on it, because back during Halloween, we weren't willing to put it out because we didn't want kids to come up and think that we were going to give them candy because we were not opening the door to anyone. So we didn't put it out for Halloween, but we've got it. So we just slapped a Christmas hat on it and we'll put it out, and that'll be one of our Christmas decorations.
I like that. I'm reading the chat. It sounds like everyone can hear us very well. Hello, Stan. Hello, George. A good a ThursdAGE to you. And if there are people who are hanging out, say hi. It is a little more unusual than we've done in the past. It's a different. It's a different set of stuff, but it sure is simple as heck, which is kind of nice. So we have so we got some nice opportunity to hang out with friends and some extended family. Derek says hello, Derek. Nice to see you and to know you are here. If you folks end up with some questions, just feel free to just type it in there, and I'll either interrupt or Owen will pretend like he can see you when he really is not supposed to, and we will.
I can't see them.
No, I'm kidding. That's my job, sir. That is my job. No, I'm joking. We can share for sure.
You're busy being disembodied.
Now, how did that happen? It looks like I said hello to my own self. So
yeah, you sure did.
Interloper. But good ThursdAGE to you as well. So talk to me a bit about. I'm trying to see. I know that there's a lot of things we've got kind of cooking, and I don't know whether or not we want to spill all the beans, but maybe we can talk a bit about some of your thoughts for the future of, I don't know. Let's start with maybe a Patreon.
I think that a RPG Patreon is a great idea. I've got a personal Patreon, which you can link to from my blog, OwenKCStephens.com, which is just where I hold all of my own thoughts on the game industry and various game systems, including most D20 systems, and a little bit on Fantasy Age, although I try and reserve more of that content for Green Ronin because they sign my checks. So a Patreon is a great way, in my opinion, to give small, tasty bits of content on a fairly regular basis to gamers that are really interested in that additional level of interaction with their creators. So I could easily see a Patreon for Age, or a patronage, if you will, system.
Yes.
Where we would. Come on, this is ThursdAGE. We're not good. That's low hanging fruit there.
It really is, yeah.
where we could give people an opportunity to pay us a few bucks a month. We might have opportunities at higher tiers. It's not like this thing is set in stone or anything. But we would have the option of saying, hey, here is one idea for how to use a stunt, or here is one small plot point or an NPC, or here's a shot that you can drop in your fantasy game. Stan likes patronage. Of course you do. I mean, he didn't say he liked it. He said, "Oh, Owen," but I know Stan. That means he likes
that
it.
means yes. That means he loves it.
Clearly.
Yeah.
And it can be difficult as a publisher to get content into people's hands, because the bigger a book is, this isn't quite universal, but to a certain extent, the bigger a book is, the more likely it is to sell well at many tiers. Which means that frequently you don't want to sell, here's one page of content, because people are like, 1 page. I'm not going to even pay $1 for one
it's
page.
like a value proposition. They want the big bundle of stuff as opposed to the little guy. Yeah.
And when you're talking about a giant book, that means you're like, well, we're going to have to cover 15 different topics, or, if it's a bestiary, 200 different topics. And all those topics are monsters, but they're different kinds of monsters. And you might well not have a good place for, hey, I have an idea just for how to do a zombie apocalypse in Fantasy Age, for example. Now, you could just go pick up a Fantasy Age Citadel. What is the name of that project? We just did it.
You're talking about... Are you talking about Lost Citadel?
Yes, Lost Citadel.
Yeah.
Lost Citadel has lots of good stuff if you want to do zombie apocalypse things. So it's not my line, so I can't come up with the name of it, of course. But, if I mentioned a few weeks ago this idea of saying, hey, you could do a campaign where everyone has some draconic heritage, and do that by giving them these dragon stunts that they get and other people don't. That's the sort of thing that you can't always fit into a bigger book without just having a big, long list of utterly unconnected ideas. But if we had a Patreon, it would be easy to say, hey, on Monday, we're going to give you a piece of Fantasy Age content. It may vary, and it's a few hundred words that we can put out and people can get without us having to go through the publishing process for a whole book. And we can get feedback on it immediately. So someone goes, oh, that's really neat, but doesn't that not work as well as this other option you've already published? And then we can explain why we think it's a different option, or we can say, hey, we didn't think of that, or we can improve it. So you can have a really more interactive experience without trying to get every gamer in the world to actually sit at our gaming table, which obviously we would love to do, but we don't have that much Mountain Dew. So
true that. And it's been my experience too with Patreons that you can that the fidelity you reach with those people who are that committed and into the work that you do, and how it connects to other players who may not be a part, or other, consumers who may not be a part or that close, or have, the finances or interest. But it doesn't, the content that comes out of a patronage is, it's quite good. People enjoy it.
Yeah, I think it could be great. And it is freed from some of the limitations. Jason Waltman says hi. Hi, Jason. It is freed from some of the limitations of a print book, right? Like, if you're doing a print book, you are really looking at doing things in signatures. So and it used to be you wanted to be a multiple of 32 pages, or if you're willing to pay a little more, a multiple of 16. And it's a little closer now that you can probably just get any even number of pages if you're willing to go to the right printer. But that still means that if what you have is a 300-word idea, and that doesn't even fit a whole page, but it's a good idea by itself, Patreon is a great way to put that in people's hands. And then if it's popular, if they like it, you can maybe build on it and it can become something else. One of the things that I have really discovered working on both Fantasy Age and, for that matter, before that, Starfinder, is just that games sort of mature. They're a lot like cheese in this regard. You can put it out, it's perfectly edible, it's perfectly good, and you've play tested it, you've gone through a whole process with it, but you have not put it in the hands of thousands of fans. As some time goes on, it will reach more maturity, and people will say, everyone who likes this base set of mechanics would like them better if some other thing. And as a game designer, you don't necessarily know what will be popular and what the people who like the thing you have. Stan just suggested Cheese Age. I assure you that
I would only accept that if we pronounced it Cheesage.
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 Punnage. We'll see. I
Yeah,
the wine age as well. As it matures, you learn more about what the people who are fans of this game want and how they're using it and how they're playing it, and where they might feel that there is a lack. It is not objective, right? It is entirely subjective what a game needs to have added to it and what it needs to cover. So if you're looking at Fantasy Age, just a basic rule book, which is, it's very intentionally short and tight, and does not go herring off on a lot of other subjects. And then if you look at the Fantasy Age Companion, that has a bunch of places where people said, okay, I really like this, but shouldn't we have rules for sieges? Shouldn't we have rules for different kinds of magic? And shouldn't we have rules for people who aren't mages to have a little spell casting? Wouldn't it be nice if we had some different heritages that you could play as player options? And that's the sort of thing that you can get a lot of feedback and discover how these are actually used at the table. And that is a great way to say, okay, let's do a new rule book. Maybe you're wanting to do an advanced rule book instead of a basic rule book and say, hey, this is a little thicker. It's a little more stuff. But if you already know what you're doing, you want to do that. Or you might have the sort of thing like what we did with the Campaign Builder's Guide, where one of the constant questions about Fantasy Age is, okay, but what do I do with this? Where am I supposed to set this? How do I set up a campaign? What if I want wizards and clerics to be different? And the Campaign Builder's Guide covers that sort of subject. So one of the advantages to me...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Finish your thought. Well, I wanted to pause you real quick because I wanted to challenge you on something. Not challenge you so much as interrogate the idea.
Mm-hmm.
You had said you kind of opened with the notion that this kind of stuff is subjective. I wonder, though, with your given your expertise and experience and given the work that you have done, does that subjectivity get replaced with sort of an expertise as to a way that a thing is done? I mean, I know that there's a million ways to do one thing, but don't you find that you get sort of frictionless a little bit in kind of the way that you do things?
Oh, never frictionless.
Okay.
So all game design, and especially all role-playing game design, is caught on a series of tensions where things are pulling in opposite directions, right? Like everyone agrees that you want your rules to be as clear as possible. That's pretty much universally accepted. So that's one tension. And then a lot of people also want it to be written with as few words as possible. Well, fewer words does not always lead to increased clarity. It can, but sometimes fewer words will mean decreased clarity. So there you have a tension between those two things. Then you get cases where, and I wrote about this in my blog today for that matter, someone might say, well, I want to make sure that every option in the game plays differently. It feels different. I want those options to be relevant, and which thing I choose change how the game plays. And then someone else says, okay, but I want every option to be equally good. I don't want there to be any bad options listed. Well, if all the options are equally good, there's a group of people who are going to feel like those options therefore aren't relevant. If I can do three things, but they're all just as effective, then that's really three different descriptions of one thing. So when I say it's subjective, a lot of it is about what Steve Kenson recently called table feel. How do players react to these rules? What do they think these rules mean? And how can you tweak those rules to give them a better feeling experience at the table? Now, there are some objective things that can come up. There are some math issues, right? Like if you say, hey, this is a game where every time you roll a 1, something terrible happens. And then you say, oh, and as you get better at something, you can add more dice. Well, if that's all you do, the more dice you add, the more likely you are to roll another 1. So you've created a mechanic where the better you are at something, the more likely it is for something terrible to happen. That is a question where there is a objective probability, where as a experienced game designer, you can say, this isn't going to do what we want it to. This is going to have this unintended consequence. And those are things that can be objective. But then if you say, well, is it a good idea for every action you take to be capable of generating something terrible? That becomes subjective instead of objective. Like some people love critical fumble systems. And they're like, there should always be some percent chance. If you're doing Fantasy Age, right, it's a 1 in a 216 chance that you'll roll 3 1s. And there are a bunch of people who say, hey, I want every time you roll 3 1s, for something terrible to happen, I think that'll be fun. And then there are other people saying, wait a minute, that means that if this veteran experienced noble warrior is in 10 fights, and each fight he stabs 20 people, then one every 10 fights, something's terrible is going to happen. And that's true no matter how good he is, no matter how experienced he is. So you get different opinions on what should the mechanics model. That's subjective. How well do the mechanics model that can be subjective. Numerically, what results are you going to produce? That can be objective, but even then, there are a lot of places. It's pretty common in D20 design, for example, for someone to say, this gives you a +2 chance to be better at this one thing. And people will say, well, that's boring and it doesn't come up much. I never fail by 1 or 2. Well, that's a flat, all things being equal, that's a flat 10% chance at being better. That's a good chance at being better. But if people don't feel like, if it doesn't feel like it ever comes up, then the table feel of that rule is that it is both boring and not particularly effective.
That's interesting, Owen. You bring up, I think, a very important point that oftentimes the reality doesn't fit with the feel. And if a person is not feeling like a winner, if they're not enjoying what's happening, that no amount of arguing them into feeling good about it really matters, right?
Yeah. I mean, a game should be fun, right? Ultimately, a game should be fun. I think some of that is play style. I think there are people who their play style meshes well with some game mechanics than others. And I think some of it is what you're used to and what you're experienced with and what you were brought up with. But I do also think that there are things as game designers we can look at feedback and say, okay, it is maybe not universal that this option is less fun than this other one, but it certainly seems way more common that this option is less fun than the other one. And if you can delve down and figure out why that's less fun, that can really help.
So one of the things I like about this little program that we're running right now, this little StreamYard, is that I can quote you right away and just throw it right in there and have it scrolling underneath the chat as like we are some kind of...
I saw that. That's cool.
I do like that. We do have a couple comments here, which I do love. Let's see. Jason Waltman says, "Can you refine alignment and age so it's not rehashed D&D alignment?"
That's interesting. I was just talking about alignment with some Paizo designers and developers. Ron Lundeen, who's a actual member of the bar, a Washington State lawyer, and a great designer, and one of he is the actual nicest person in gaming as opposed to me, and James Case and some other people. And there was here we are amongst well-educated, experienced, veteran, professional game designers, and we couldn't agree on what a good alignment system was to save our lives. We did agree that the alignment system of D&D is very much a part of what makes D&D feel like D&D. So if you want alignment in a fantasy age game and you want that alignment to make it feel like D&D, you can just pretty much borrow D&D alignment straight, slap it in the book. Another example that came up was the Palladium fantasy role-playing game, which has alignments, but the alignments are more like personality types. So there's like scoundrel is an alignment and deviant is an alignment. And they talk more about what kind of person you are and what your motivations are. And they're not necessarily described in terms of good and evil, law and chaos. I think you can, and you could do alignment as short and varied if you wanted to, as saying, hey, every player write one sentence of no more than 10 words that describes how your character makes ethical decisions, right? So if someone writes down, I am always looking to get away with whatever makes me popular. That's it. Well, that's not good, but it's not necessarily evil, and you determine what I can get away with. So you're aware there's a line you can't cross. Someone else might write, I'm always looking to do the most good for the most people. Well, you've essentially described core utilitarianism. And that,
right. Yeah,
that can be challenged in a number of ways. It's not true, but I kind of no longer want to have discussions about alignment with anyone who has not watched the entirety of the television show The Good Place. because I think the good place is one of the best base level layman explorations of some questions of ethics and morality and decision making that has ever been put on television.
I agree. There's a depth there that is that could be mistaken for a shallowness. There's a lot of fun that goes on, but yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Speaking of unpacking, we've got a couple. I'd love to sort of watch sentiment as it kind of bubbles up, and as it does, oftentimes it comes in pairs and quads, and sometimes whole thousands of people. But there's a couple questions about one. Jason says, "What about when a stunt becomes too powerful?" Derek says, "Excellent discussion. Part and parcel of the discussion is, do you fear stunt bloat in Fantasy Age?" Now, describe for people who maybe just smelling what we're stepping in for the first time. What are they talking about?
So there are two related but separate issues, and I will start with stunt bloat because I think that's the thing that is least obvious intuitively just from hearing it. The concept of stunt bloat, which is also feat bloat, would be a similar concept, although it would be talent or specialization bloat in Fantasy Age. The idea is that there becomes so many choices for a thing that the game gets slowed down. In the case of selecting specializations or talents, it gets slowed down because I have to read 3 books and 50 different things to pick the one that is going to be just right for my character for the next choice. In the case of stunt bloat, if there are like 30 different stunts that I can use anytime I roll stunt points, and stunt points are coming up in roughly a quarter of all rolls, then 1/4 of the time you got to stop and look through this list of 30 things. If there are 5 things, and I'm using 2 extremes, right? There are neither 30 nor 5 in Fantasy Age. If there are 5 things, then I could probably memorize those 5 things within a game or 2, and I'm always picking what I want pretty quickly, but then there's less variability. So there are these 2 tensions. One is I want there to be lots of options, and I want them to be interesting, and I want unexpected things to happen. And the other is that I don't want to have to study like I am going to be taking a test on this in order to play my character quickly, and I don't want the game to slow to a close. So for the question, do I fear feat or stunt bloat in Fantasy Age? Yes, it's one of my number one concerns. It's something that the Age developers and Chris Primus, who originally created the system, talk about a lot. One of the reasons I'm currently running what I am calling more of a test bed game than a playtest game for Fantasy Age is that it lets me try potential solutions with a group of people who are excellent veteran role players and who prior to this game were not Age players. So they are coming to it from a veteran RPG experience place, right? Sometimes 35, 40 years of role-playing experience, but not veteran at Age. So they can see it in a fresh set of eyes from that regard. One of the things I tried recently to try and square that circle of these 2 tensions was I had a specific encounter that was taking place in a crowded marketplace in a city. And I said, this is supposed to be a wild, somewhat wacky Pirates of the Caribbean style fight where unexpected things are regularly happening and coming up, and they are options that you couldn't necessarily have planned for. You, your character, will see an opportunity that you might not have been able to plan for. So I've created a series of location stunts, and every time anyone runs stunt points, one will be handed to you at random, and it will have a stunt point cost between 1 and 3, and you can use it or not. That's entirely up to you. And whether or not you use it, it is then discarded. And what that meant was every time someone rolled stunt points, they had one new stunt to consider. I could hand it to them and they didn't have to look it up. They could say, I've got my normal list of 10 stunts I can attempt, or I have here an option that I can cut a support rope and drop a cargo net on someone and they'll be entangled. That has just come up in the fight because everyone's moving and everything's spinning. Yeah. And then they can decide, do I want to do this one new and interesting thing that has never come up before, or do I want to stick with my regular stunts? And then that was discarded. And when the next person came up with stunt points, it was, okay, you can inspire a local citizen to throw a boiling teapot out their window and hit a bad guy. That's a new circumstance. The tea just came to boil. You can do that or not. And I intentionally made those random stunts slightly more powerful for their stunt point cost than standard stunts because you couldn't plan for them. You couldn't expect them. They would happen once and then never come up again. And in general, the players seem to really like that attempt to balance too many stunts versus having to know too many things. The drawback of that system, because everything is a set of tensions, is that either a GM has to write up a series of stunt points for every interesting fight, or you have to have some sort of product that, say, a publisher might sell you that might be, hey, here's the random stunt pack for fighting on ships and shipyards, and here's the one for inns and taverns, and here's the one for fighting in crypts and cursed tombs. And I'm not saying that we are going to do that, but I'm not saying we're not going to do that. But the first thing I wanted to do is see how people react to it, because the reaction at the table could have been, this is always one more thing. I'm never going to want to pick this. The reaction could always have been, oh, these are always more interesting, so I don't care about anything else, and I wish I had these options all the time. In this case, it was much more what I expected, which was sometimes they felt like it was good, sometimes they felt like it wasn't. And in fact, I ran out of stunts, and that was one of the important things I learned, was that you can math out how much stunts show up on average, but one of the things you have to remember when you're talking about how a game actually plays is that the average doesn't happen on average. The average is rarely what actually occurs. So you want a system to work well, not only with an average set of numbers, but when people are rolling really, really well and when they're rolling pretty badly. If it doesn't accommodate those two extremes, then there will be a lot of play experiences that are not satisfying for players. So I thought I had figured out how many new random stunts I would need, and I was way off. I needed like 3 times more than I had because people were rolling stunt points a lot.
Interesting.
That comes back to the question about when a stunt becomes too powerful. There are 2 ways a stunt can become more powerful. One is if the stunt is just written to be too powerful as a universal circumstance. And that would mean that either the game design does not charge enough stunt points for it, or the game design has written it as being a little too powerful for the current stunt point cost, but not so powerful that you should charge an extra stunt point. And that can actually happen down the line, right? Like there's a piercing attack that allows you to ignore half of an opponent's armor rating. Well, if when we write the basic rule book, only 1 out of 5 monsters has an armor rating, then we can price that correctly. But then if in the bestiary, half the monsters have an armor rating, then we may have retroactively made that stunt too powerful because we have caused more and more and more foes to be things you want to use it against. And one of the things you want to do as a game designer is look, this is again that maturity thing I was talking about, look at the direction the game is evolving and see if these things are too powerful, not powerful enough. How have they evolved? How are people using them? The other thing that a GM can do is say, hey, if I am always finding people drawing up Mighty Blow, they always want Mighty Blow. If they can do it, they always throw those dice. And if you're doing like Modern Age where they have a stunt attack, they are always trying to build up to being able to do a Mighty Blow or something like that. Actually, that doesn't work. Ignore that example. If that is the case, then you may be throwing one type of threat at your players too often. So it might be, okay, I'm throwing the one big villain at people too often. I ought to more often throw 8 little tiny easy to kill goblins, because then you are less interested in Mighty Blow and more interested in options that give you extra attacks. So is some, how am I designing it as the game designer, as the company, how are we supporting it? And some element of it are you using as a GM, and how can you modify those if your players are getting in a rut?
So here's an interesting question. Jason Waltman asks, what subsystem would you like to add to Fantasy Age? Do I hear a hint of some thoughts that you have specific to environment and that kind of thing? Or like what are some things that you feel like would be a complementary? Understanding this, here is the caveat. No promises. So everybody take a deep breath.
Absolutely.
We're having a creative dialogue. So yeah. I just don't want you to get into a jackpot when everyone's like, wait, you and Troy said.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that there are new ways we can use stunts, which I consider to be the beating heart of the Age system, without sliding into Stunt Bloat, that would make the game more exciting and more interesting. And a lot of them are cases of having stunts where we may have added a plethora of stunts in a subsystem, but very, very, very few come up at any given moment, and they are always discrete things that the player and the GM can know in advance. Layers is a good example of that. Layers has stunts for layers, layer stunts. So, for example, it might say, hey, you're fighting a dragon in his cavern. The dragon's breath weapon is normally a line that's 60 feet long, but because he knows his cavern so well, he can play that breath weapon against a wall and instead affect a short cone. That's the stunt he can have. Now, that is adding a stunt to the game, but that's a stunt that the GM only has to worry about with that monster in that location. So you plan that out in advance, and then it's a nasty surprise for the players if they're like, okay, we're carefully never getting in a line. We'll always face him in a little wedge so that he can't ever get any of us. We fought him once before, and then he pulls off the stunt. You describe it, the dragon plays his fire across the ceiling. It hits the stalagmites, shoots down and covers this cone. That's one stunt point for him. And there are more monsters that do that, right? That this creature has this stunt option. And I think the solid ways to add things to the game. I would love to be able, writing of stunts is always going to be more than science, but I would love to give GMs some more guidance on saying to create stunts for specific circumstances and say things like, hey, adding one stunt for a monster or one stunt for a location are ways to spice things up. And the entire stunt system is the way that Fantasy Age sort of solves the problem I was alluding to earlier, that if an option is a optimal option, you may get bored because it is always the thing you want to do. Well, with the stunt system, you may have a optimal option for most foes most of the time, but every time you get stunt points, you are doing something else, and that may well end up being a better option for that moment. And Stan has sent more art.
Oh, nice, Stan.
Which I am going to drop the same place I dropped art last time.
Why don't we have you? I'm worried that we're having a little latency issue, and I'm not sure if it's me or you. But why don't you share it?
I can't share anything. I don't think in the chat it won't let. Well, wait a minute, hold it. I can maybe do this. Wait. We got a whole new system. You get to watch this live, folks.
We'll do it live.
Okay, hold on. Working on it.
He's going to draw it out on a piece of paper, and he's going to hold it up in front of the camera.
That's exactly what I'm going to do, obviously. I just want to make sure that I don't have... I'm going to share my screen, and I want to make sure there isn't anything on my screen that is going to violate an NDA. All right. Okay, share screen. Here we go. Share screen. Share.
Sharing music.
Your entire screen. Why won't it let me do it? Choose what you'd like to share. That right there. How about this?
I'd like to share my recipe for cookies.
There. Did that work?
I see. Hold on here. I do. Thank you for that. Honestly, this is brilliant. I love it.
What I particularly love about that is that he has correctly drawn the fact that my China coffee mug has kaiju on it.
That's right. Yeah. They were having some conversation.
Fairly obvious to people just seeing it in passing.
You have an astute viewer. All right. Nice. That's great. Stan, always a pleasure. Truly amazing. Stan, you're the one that contributed the Time Werewolves.
Yep.
That was nice. Yeah, that was really, really good stuff.
If you folks want to see more of Stan's art, you can go to the stanx.com. That's STANNEX.com, which is the home of all things Stan. Stan is a wonderful cartoonist and game designer and veteran of the industry, creative director, writer, editor, good friend, kaiju enthusiast.
Kaiju enthusiast, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, he was also our sumo-allier in that he introduced us to sumo and explained it to us until we became fans.
Now, does he walk over to the table and let you smell one? And you kind of like, he's like, is it okay? Do you like this sumo?
Do you like this kaiju? Do you like this? Yeah, I mean, he kind of did, honestly. He has been to Japan. He was a fan of sumo. Sumo was coming up. He was mentioning it, and I just mentioned to him in passing. I've always wanted to understand sumo, but I've never really had the opportunity. And it was like, oh well, if you would like to know more about sumo, and we honestly did. So back when I was living in Seattle, we had him over, and he showed us some sumo and explained what was going on. And once we understood the context and the background, it became one of the two sports I watch. So this whole household is a sumo household.
I want to say hello to Jeremiah McCoy. Did you miss anything? No, we are just now talking about, you did miss some very good conversation. Unfortunately, this is all being recorded and put into the time capsule for later reveal. But I wanted to ask, when it comes very specifically to the to sumo, where do they put the cork? Like, does it kind of
the same place they put it for 600 years? And sumo is steeped in tradition and is a glimpse into the actual lives of samurai updated to the modern era with many fewer changes than you would think.
I love it. I really do. And it is a fascinating culture, kind of glimpse into the past. It's something that I really value and have enjoyed over. Yeah. It's very, and you're absolutely right. It's something that has really kind of held its own, over the course of major cultural shifts, but has also adapted to the times and done what it's pretty fantastic. Oh yeah. Stan says actually it's Stannex, STANNEX.com. Little known fact, because the traditional product they use in their top knot sumo rikishi actually smell really nice. Go good. Well, I'm glad that they do. I would imagine no less actually.
Someone just suggested sumo should be a character class. I think it would be easy enough to do a sumo specialization, so that any warrior or even rogue or mage could become a sumotori.
Interesting. At the risk of so when you think about these, these stunts or adding sort of complexities or texture to an experience or to a campaign, are there things that you will purposefully kind of avoid, or that you have kind of put on a list of like, we're just not doing that? It doesn't have to necessarily be, yeah, go ahead.
So there's always the question of there's a whole list of questions that you have to answer before adding something to a game is a good idea. I will give some examples. Specifically, let's talk about sumo, for example. I could probably a sumo specialization, a sumotori or rikishi specialization specifically for warriors for Fantasy Age. But I'm not going to. And one of the reasons I'm not going to is that there is, in fact, some deep cultural and even religious significance to many elements of sumo that I am not an expert in. I am very specifically a non-Japanese. I'm not a scholar of it, right? I've read one book on sumo and I've been watching for 5 years. So even if I could do a passing version of it, I would not be true to what the nature of it is. Now, if I wanted to be inspired by that and say, hey, there are a lot of different forms of wrestling, many of which are centuries old. And so I have borrowed from the things I know about sumo and pancration, the Greek wrestling, and even Mexican wrestling, masked wrestling, for example. And I've combined all those into a pan-cultural wrestling concept. That's one thing. But if I wanted sumo, first of all, that raises the question of what is the equivalent of Japan in this setting? What about the religious elements to it? What kind of experts can I get? There are things that really ought to be tackled by people who have expertise within that subject. And this includes a lot of, anytime you're touching on real world religion, you got to be very, very careful about it. So that is one set of examples. And it's not like there aren't, people who are either scholar in the area of Japan and its culture and probably even sumo, or native Japanese people who also happen to be RPG designers or who are writers of some flavor that you could work with to create RPG design. And I think it's important that for far too long, everything has been a version of colonization, that we would, as a dominant culture, say, oh, everything around us is a smorgasbord for us to, parody might be the wrong word, but to
co-opt.
It's co-opt. Thank you. Exactly. That we're going to co-opt and press it into our mold, and we're going to call it that thing. I think that can do real cultural harm. So that is one whole category of things that I at least would not be adding the way I add other stuff. That doesn't mean I might not do a book that says, hey, this is based on feudal Japan, and these are the steps we took to address those cultural issues, including having people that are members of the culture be involved.
Important. And that is, that's an industry thing that has gained more traction of late, I would say, over the course of the last, 3 to 5 years than ever before, where there are whole departments devoted to culture checks. And we certainly have our connections and people that we work with an affinity and an understanding for that stuff. And I definitely appreciate that. Are there tropes or things that kind of fall outside of the hotbed stuff and kind of are more about like the thing that Owen's just like, oh no, we'll never do that, or not in my game, not while I live on this earth?
Well, I mean, of course there are, right? Like, I could, for example, write a chainmail bikini talent for Fantasy Age that says, hey, if you happen to be playing a female warrior and you have a high communication score, which indicates that you are attractive, you can wear less armor than your armor rating should normally give you, as long as it is shaped to match your curves, and your defense rating goes up. That's a trope. That is a well-trod trope. And for that matter, Gail Simone has done some wonderful things with Red Sonja, who's one of the characters of that trope.
Yeah, sure.
Updating it and doing interesting things with it. I'm not the person to try and rescue that trope. And I'm not stopping people from wanting to do something with that trope in their games. That's up to them. But I don't want to create hard-coded support for that trope in Fantasy Age so that anyone who wants to can grab it. And if someone says, hey, you're mocking the sexuality, you're unnecessarily sexualizing these characters and turning the game into something I don't want it to be, I don't want them to point and say, no, it's in the rule book. I get to wear a chain.
I get to do this.
Bikini, there's nothing to do about it. And that's, I mean, it's a well-trodden trope that dates back to well before my birth. And people have been trying to justify it for at least a couple of decades now. And I've done that sort of thing for games. But I feel differently about it now than I did when I last did it. And I think there are better ways to handle those questions. Other tropes that might not happen. I've been nailing ethical. What?
I want to just jump in and say this.
Yeah.
One of the things I really enjoy in talking with you over the course of our ThursdAGEs has been you're very open about the evolution of your craft and your take on the world, because a lot of what we do in tabletop roleplay is to borrow from tropes. And
totally.
And at one point in time, we did that, I would say maybe with more of a reckless abandon. And
I agree.
And watching that shift, I think is it's refreshing. It's not, to me, it doesn't feel restrictive. It actually feels like being freed of a obligation to something that really could stand, some innovation and some thoughtfulness about how we, incorporate cultures and, making sure that we're looking at the gameplay as it relates to humanity, people, and all people should be able to enjoy this stuff. And there's things that you would do to make that,
I also think sometimes it's important for us to consider moving out of appropriative spaces to leave those spaces as having more availability for people who can tackle those topics without it being appropriative.
That's fantastic. That does a couple things: respect, and opens the door for more people to come and enjoy and be a part of that in the spaces they know. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And very specifically, when I said in the spaces they know, I mean to bring the expertise, the understanding, the cultural sort of
right.
And be creators and contribute on that level. That's really fantastic.
So those were all sort of ethical, moral reasons why I might not add a trope to a game mechanically. There are other kinds of reasons. I might, for example, think, oh, I'm going to create a one-liner talent. So if you have this talent, you can rip off a one-liner and get an advantage over an opponent. There are at least two potential problems. Our cat is howling in the background. There are at least two potential problems with doing that. One is that if I do that, there will be a category of people who feel like they can't tell one-liners anymore because there's now a rule that one-liners are represented by this talent. So if I don't have talent, I can't tell one-liners in a fight. I've taken a thing that everyone used to feel like they can do, and I've codified it in a rule that feels more limiting. Secondly, there might well be people who would like to have that game mechanical edge to be able to take an action to gain an advantage over someone, but feel like if they do it, they've got to come up with one-liners, and that is a role-playing pressure upon with them that they don't want to take. Now, that doesn't mean that all attempts to include social interaction and humor and intimidating people has to be excluded from a game for fear that people will feel like it's not being done right or they can't try it at all. But it does mean that when you're looking at what to add to a game, you've got to ask yourself, am I siloing off a section of role-playing interaction or even tactics that used to be considered available to everyone? And am I adding a pressure that only people who feel extroverted are going to take this option?
Right.
And so I tend to be broader with those things than to say one-liner, right? Like if we said, hey, here's a specialization, and I'm mentioning this because these are the sorts of things that are happening in my test bed game. Here's a specialization where your character can, using any of a number of possible methodologies, knock someone off balance in combat verbally, and they have to understand you and they have to be able to hear you. But we're not saying how you do it, right? We're just saying your character is capable of that. And that gives you, Stan's got another point, which we'll get to in a second. Whether or not you do it, how you do it, that's up to you. And we're not saying every time someone does this, it has to use these rules. We're just saying that this combination of elements is available to you. Stan put it out third. At some tables, the game will stop as the players argue about whether a given one-liner is actually funny enough to get the bonus. And he's not wrong.
Well, so do people when they're gonna do the one-liner thing? Are they getting up and standing up and giving you their kind of type 5 sort of brick wall behind them, kind of, oh hey, whatever, what's with airline food, and then they really are doing that, or is it?
Well, just that if the rule says you tell a funny one-liner and you get this bonus, there would be groups that someone will say, so I'm gonna tell a funny one-liner. Don't be a sword loser. And other people in the group will groan and go, you don't get a bonus for that. That is not funny enough to qualify as a one.
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, what if I ask you a question? No, just stop. That's
that seems like And a Star Is Born.
You don't like my parlance?
Oh gosh. I love it.
I tried these jokes all out at the club.
Stop.
Jeez. That does it is sort of an interesting, fun concept of bringing a little bit of that, and we've talked about this before. Some props, you get no props for those jokes, but props of things like the idea of of sort of layering on some texture and stuff. But I do think that if there is this kind of one-liner thing, if it doesn't go over well in sort of meat space, as it were, there should be some kind of a weapon exchange, like a little bonk on your head or a little poke with a bopper or something like that.
I'm absolutely not encouraging players to hit each other in any format in game.
I know, but you are encouraging people. I absolutely, 100%. Please don't hit each other at all. But don't. I would say don't hold back when it comes to hitting people with a good pun. Always deploy the pun edge, I think. Stan says that's not good enough. You flail.
Yeah.
Jason's back. Good to see you back.
We have my wife groaning in the background now.
I was gonna say, your wife is kind of a character on this ThursdAGE event. I like it. I really do.
She always has it. Yeah.
I was cackling with glee. Was it the last one or the one before we had a visiting sort of mole person or something like a?
Yes.
Was it a? It was hilarious. It was just like perfect timing. Goodbye. It was very, very much.
That was a couple of sessions ago. Yeah, I'm in my house, folks. Stuff's going on. So that's part of the new reality.
That's true. Jeremiah says LARPing. That's what LARPing is for. My question to you on the LARPing thing: have you done that?
Oh yeah, yeah. So there's a group called the International Fantasy Gaming Society. They took their name from the Dream Park books by Barnes and Niven, and they still exist. And it's a big international group that basically does D&D in the woods with foam baffa weapons. And for many, many years, I was a big part of the local IFGS chapter here in Norman back in 2000 when we moved to Seattle for a game company job the first time. We helped set up a group there. Some well-known prop makers in the Seattle area were involved. I don't know if they're still playing or if they've moved on. But so I've done it extensively. That, of course, is one end of LARPing, the very physical hitting people with a foam weapon, yelling out the amount of damage you've done, fireball, 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 throwing beanbags kind of thing.
That's kind of a funny one that people kind of dip on all the time is sort of the internet funny. Yeah.
And I got to say, there are things I learned by LARPing that were really super useful to my insight as a pen and paper game designer. Not the least of which is there's a reason the Army teaches you to march. Staying in a line, walking with different leg lengths, walking at the same speed forward, and keeping an eye that does not come for civilians, marching order is a guess or a lie, and there is no telling where you will be at any given moment when the feces hits the circulation device.
Yes, that old feces in this circulation device. We are nearing the end of this particular ThursdAGE. I know.
Oh wow, we are.
I know, right? I mean, it happens like this every time. I get lost in the conversation because it is so good, and I really appreciate the contributions, the people that listen and watch, and they're hilarious and thoughtful, and I enjoy that very much. But we're going to be gone for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Yeah. That means
we're not going to broadcast on the eves. It's Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and we're not doing that.
No. We've got to have. I mean, let's not let the strong coffee of capitalism reach in and well, I might as well work since Christmas is a drag. No, none of that. But I wanted to maybe see if do we want to try to maybe do one of these stat this.
Actually, we got so little time left. I'm going to say no. We've got some, and I very appreciate people. Yeah, no. Let's save them because that way we've got a strong show for when we come back.
Such a good one. I have such an amazing
we've got multiple pieces of art. I have not seen these. I don't know what's coming. So in 3 weeks. We will unveil these, and then if they've got 3 weeks to come up with more things that they want to send in and force me to try and stat up for Fantasy Age.
Hey, I want to shout out to Dice Music and Beer. It says, "Hey, hi, great watch, very interesting. I had just seen that. I believe they followed one of our channels. But what I love about it is that I thought, now that's a party." Dice Music and Beer. That's where I want to go. Let's get that. Let's get our masks on and wait for the vaccination so that we can have some Dice Music and Beer. I'm telling you, I will probably go crazy with just joy being able to get out of the house.
Not a lot before that, but this time next year, I expect to be hanging out with people again.
Yes, absolutely. And very much looking forward to it. And I'll tell you this, we will have a lineup of people wherever we end up, whether it's Gen Con or whatever it is. But when it's right, it's right. We will have a line that will go all the way through the convention center waiting for some advice from you. Let's see. Jeremiah McCoy says, question, is there something you think people do see in Fantasy Age that you think they should? Anything you want to see people try? Oh, interesting question. Is there a thing, Owen, that you want to make sure that if you do Fantasy Age, do this?
So I encourage anyone that has gotten familiarity with Fantasy Age, with the core Fantasy Age, to look at some of the options, both obviously in the Fantasy Age Companion and the other books, some of which are on sale right now. So this is a great time to pick them up. But also, while the Age system books aren't all the same, they have a very, very high degree of compatibility. So I think it's worth looking at Dragon Age and Blue Rose and The Expanse. The Expanse has a game mechanic, a subsystem called the Churn. And I don't want to go into it because that's a different game system, different developer. But I will say that it is, in my opinion, a brilliant heist complexity mechanism that you could make a very different feeling Fantasy Age by picking up the Churn and adopting it for Fantasy Age. And Modern Age has a lot of, like, Modern Age has different levels of realism, right? Gritty realism versus pulp realism. And I think there are a lot of ideas there that will allow you to fine tune exactly what your Age experience is really pretty easily. And so I would really encourage anyone who feels like they've mastered the basic levels of the game and are looking for other options to look at our other Age games. And obviously, if you ever get a Patreon up and running, look at our Patreon and experiment with it. Because one of the advantages of the Age system is that the core mechanic is very, very, very simple and very, very, very flexible. And I find those two things allow for some really fascinating customization.
Yeah, and I like the notion, too, of being exposed to some of the other brilliant, innovative takes on resolution of conflict, and you come away with a deeper understanding, not just of kind of how Age works, but you also get, I mean, I think it conditions you a bit. I'm sitting here looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 stacks, and I mean stacks. These are stacked up high books. I am surrounded by the genius of the Team Green Ronin, and I'm telling you, these books are friggin'. I was just about to drop an F-bomb. They're beautiful. They are well written. They are. It's pretty amazing. And the reason why I'm surrounded by all of these tomes is because we're going to be doing an event probably around, I want to say we'll do it maybe the 2nd to 3rd week of January. You know, things are a little slow. Maybe we just bounce them back. We're going to do, I'll say a QVC style chat about getting in. We're going to look at the books. We're going to talk about them. We're going to dissect them. We're going to do the thing. And then I am also going to kick off something with a new streamer pal that will be debuted in the new year. And we are going to play every single game that Green Ronin has made. And
oh, wow.
We're going to invite people to come and be guest GMs. We're going to have people come and be NPCs. We're going to have people from the community come and kind of play with us, but we're really looking forward to it. And part of that is to expand my knowledge and understanding of things. But also, I can't believe I get paid to do that. So I'm going to lean in.
I know that feeling well. I do.
Yeah. On that note, always a joy to hang out with you on ThursdAGE. I bid you a good ThursdAGE to you and to everybody who's been hanging out and chatting. I really do appreciate that. Get your monsters. We have a couple weeks, so sit down and think about, it doesn't even have to be monsters. It can be something. Just, maybe mine wasn't going to be a monster. Who knows? But we'll see we'll see you over the holidays. You'll see us online and we'll say hey and wish you well and all of that good stuff. But do take care of yourself. Do spend some time talking to loved ones, making sure that you're checking on your loved ones. Wear that mask, and let's get on the other side of this and get together and play some games. I'm ready for it.
Zoom your friends.
Zoom your friends. Absolutely. All right, Owen, thank you so much. I will talk to you
Thanks, Troy.
in the near future because we talk every single day. Before we go to bed, we'd call each other, brush each other's hair. It's really sweet.
It's very tender.
All the rest of it is very sweet. A very sweet lover. Stan, you have a great holiday season as well. Jason, you too. Everybody, take good care, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, folks.